992 crash in Lagos. Can you please introduce yourself and how much experience you have about flying?
I'm Captain John Cox. I'm a retired airline pilot. I flew for one of the U.S. airlines for 25 years, a little over 23 of that as a captain, and 10 years before that. So I've got some 14,000 hours flight time on a variety of types of aircraft, including a good number of commercial airliners.
Have you ever flown an MD-83 before?
No, I have not flown the MD-83. I flew most of my time in Boeing 737s.
So you have read and heard a lot about the Nigerian air crash somewhere close to Lagos, actually 4 minutes from landing. What is it like to be an air pilot 4 minutes away from landing? Can you explain that to our viewers?
It's a routine part of every flight. Pilots, it's our work environment. So being 4 minutes out, things are busy, but almost everything is done. The landing gear's down, the flaps are configured, all the checklists are run, the communications with cabin staff is all complete, and you're in the very final stages of the communication with air traffic control. By that stage, you're lined up with the runway normally, and you're preparing for the landing.
So typically, how many nautical miles is 4 minutes away from the airport?
That's about 8 to 10 miles out, depending on the speed, but 140 nautical miles per hour or knots is typical, so you'd be 8 to 10 miles out.
Okay, so with regards to MD, this particular flight Dana Flight 992, the question is, what could have happened? 4 minutes from the airport, 10 miles from the airport. The airline is saying that they think there was a bird strike, and we're hearing stories about engine failures, 2 engines failing an MD-83. What do you think might have happened?
I've been an accident investigator for over 30 years, and I know one thing for absolute certain is we don't have enough information yet, but we will have. We have the flight data recorder, we have the cockpit voice recorder, we have the engines, and those 3 items will tell us the story of this flight. For 2 jet engines, modern jet engines, to quit back-to-back like as has been reported is extraordinarily rare. The airline mentioned the possibility of a bird strike, and it is possible, but extremely rare. Other things that the investigators will look at is proper fuel, and if in fact at the point of impact were the engines producing power, and that's quite easy to tell based on the types of damage to the rotating components within the engine. So we'll have an answer pretty quickly, but right now there's more questions than answers.
This flight is being operated by a U.S. pilot who was actually supposed to come back to Florida that same night. Have you ever heard or met Mr. Waxman before?
I don't know him. I actually live in Florida, but there are a lot of pilots that were trained in the United States flying all over the world, and I believe this captain had quite a bit of experience. So my not knowing him may only mean that he was flying outside the United States, and our paths had not had the opportunity to cross.
So let's go back to the flight. 4 minutes from landing. What do you think possibly could have led to this? Because one thing we know at this point is that the flight crashed on its belly as opposed to nose diving. What could have happened? Scenarios.
Well, the thing that the investigators will look at is the airplane was obviously under control when it landed, just because, as you say, it landed right side up, and that indicates control. They're going to make sure that all the pieces of the airplane are in close proximity to each other. That means that the airplane came down in one piece. They're going to look at the engines to see if they're producing power. They're going to listen to the cockpit voice recorder to see if the crew picks up any information or alert messages, anything to determine what is causing the problem. So investigators very methodically are going to look at each piece. Was there adequate fuel on board for the flight? Did the airplane burn the correct amount of fuel? Were there any mechanical issues? Things such as that. So it's a very methodical process of eliminating things until you come up with the probable cause.
You had mentioned that it is improbable that two engines will fail at the same time. And I want you to elaborate on that, knowing what you know as a pilot.
Modern jet engines are incredibly reliable. So this means that we fly over oceans where there isn't an alternate nearby based on the reliability of these jet engines. And the particular type of engine that's on this MD-83, which is a JT8, is one that goes back in its design back into the 60s, and it's been refined, but it has an extraordinarily good, robust history. It's a very tough engine. It's a very good, solid engine with a very good reputation and history. So the idea that for unrelated causes, two JT8s would quit, it would be a very, very low probability event. There is much more likely a common denominator that caused them to quit, and there are not very many of those. Fuel or damage to the engines would be simultaneous damage to the engines would be the two leading causes that the investigators will look at.
This is another angle that we have listened to and written about on Sahara Reporters, which is the fact that when the jetliner was approaching several minutes, it actually landed on a longer runway, the international runway 8R, the right runway, and that meant from the point of view of the air controllers, that probably one engine had failed at that time, and they were just trying to get to land and have enough space to control. And then suddenly, a few minutes later, they got a call, mayday, emergency, second engine has failed. If one engine had failed before they got the emergency call, what would be the possibility that the second engine failed under pressure because of maybe payload, which is under consideration here?
The idea that they would want to land on 8 right with the potential of one engine having failed would be routine. Pilots are trained and practice flying the airplane with one engine shut down. It is something that pilots routinely train for. So the pilots would consider it an abnormality and yes, an emergency, but it wouldn't be anything that they would not be prepared to handle. So advising air traffic control that we have an engine shut down, we would like priority handling for runway 8 right would be a normal routine call to make to the air traffic controllers. It says that they're handling the situation and that they expect to land with one engine shut down on 8 right. When they say that they've lost the second engine, that changes things dramatically, because now it is not likely that they can make the airport, and because of the glide characteristics of the jet, particularly configured for landing, and so that means that they're not going to have the opportunity unless they can get one of the two engines started, which would be the first thing that obviously at least one of the pilots would be concentrating on, is trying to get one of the engines restarted.
There will be situations where pilots will lose engines and they will kind of glide to landing. How much time do pilots have in terms of between failure of engines and landing and gliding and all of that processes, you think, in your view, that could have saved more lives in this circumstance?
The times when jet engines simultaneously have failed are very few. There are some cases. There's an Airbus A330 that lost both engines due to a fuel leak and landed in the Azores, but they had this problem from cruise altitude. Another one was an Air Canada Boeing 767, and they were also able to land it. One of the things that's critical with this flight is that they were at low altitude, which means that they did not have very much time. They either had to get an engine restarted or accept whatever was in front of them as far as a place to put the jet. The problem is that the speed is in roughly about 140 knots or so, or maybe a bit faster. It's going to take a lot of distance to stop it, and as a result, there's going to be a lot of damage for the on the ground and to the jet. So I am confident that the pilots, when they realized that they were going to have to make an off-airport landing, did the very best they could to minimize the damage both to the jet and to the any people or structures near them.
I mean, could we have had a situation like the Hudson River landing in this case, if, with two engines failing? Because you remember the Hudson River, the two engines failed apparently, but there was some kind of safe landing on water.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I know that captain. I've known him for over 20 years. In the Hudson case, they were able to find a place to put the jet that was smooth and it didn't hit anything. So, and they did a wonderful job of flying the airplane until we recognize and get the flight data recorders from this flight. It's hard to say whether they could have done something different or better, and it's awfully early and very speculative to attempt to do that. So I think the thing is to recognize that this crew had a very short amount of time to deal with a catastrophic event if in fact that second engine did fail, and that left them very little time, and they were in a position of not having very many good alternatives.
I would ask you, as a pilot who's flown for several years, have you had any close calls?
Well, I characterize that this way. Have you ever been scared driving your car? If you do something frequently, you'll have occasion where things will challenge you. And of course, as a professional pilot, I've had challenging events, but I've never had two engines fail.
Tell me which one is the most challenging before we let you go.
When I was a very young pilot, we got into a very, very severe icing condition, and it was very questionable for a period of time if we were going to actually be able to get the airplane to the airport. We did. It was a lot of lessons learned that night.
And where was that?
Going into Erie, Pennsylvania.
Wow. Did you tell the passengers that they were in trouble?
We were pretty busy just trying to keep the airplane as de-iced or as flying the best that we could, and the landing was pretty rough. They knew that it had not been a good approach, and they could tell in conversations with us that it had been very challenging for both of us.
Again, and this is my last question. We thank you, John Cost, for coming. What should the Nigerian government or the aviation authorities in Nigeria do to prevent this kind of problem in it? Because one of the things we heard was that this air jet landed on its belly and it did not actually explode on it 20 minutes after, which means that if emergency support came on time, probably they could have saved lives. Well,
I think it is very, very important to recognize that your Director General of Civil Aviation is one of the best in the world. He is a recognized expert, and I would encourage everyone in Nigeria to listen to Dr. Harold Demirian and take his advice. Listen, I know he has said, be patient for the investigation. I think that's sound advice. And before the government makes any move legislatively, I would encourage them, listen to your Director General of Civil Aviation. He is one of the true experts in the world, and he and the team that is investigating this accident will have the answers necessary. It's a tragedy. It's a very deep tragedy for all in Nigeria and for all of us in aviation. But Nigeria is most fortunate to have a Director General of Civil Aviation of the quality that they do.
One last thing, and this is my second last question, is does the age of an airplane matter? Because this is a 22-year-old MD-83 plane. He's been with Alaska Airlines for several years, had some problems, and he ended up in Nigeria. And people are saying, well, this was a dumping ground for this kind of airliner. You know, does the age matter? Does it matter that this is a 22-year-old airplane that is not probably well maintained?
The maintenance is the key. A well-maintained airplane can go well beyond 23 or 4 years. It can go almost infinitely if the maintenance is done properly. So it's essential that the airline not only maintain it, but have a good oversight system. Also, the Nigerian Aviation Authority needs to have good oversight to ensure that the maintenance of these older airplanes is properly done. If you follow the manufacturer's suggested maintenance program, these airplanes can go a very, very long time. So until we know if maintenance played any part of this tragedy, we have to keep that question open.
Thank you very much, John, for coming on our show on SaharaTV today. And by tomorrow, we'll find out more. There's no doubt about it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.